All right, guys, welcome back. So, let's talk a little bit about identifying hazards and threats. When we focus on the more localized threats and preparing for those are kind of our foundation in which we build upon, because those are the things that we know that we're going to be dealing with year after year. I'm in Pennsylvania. In the area that I'm located, we are highly prone to flooding. For the first couple years in my house, it was a constant, game of trying to waterproof and trying to find the sources of the flood and why is there so much water. All these things took time to assess, make small changes, assess again, and finally, after 3 years, we're at a place now where our basement has virtually no flooding coming in as long as we're doing our jobs and going through the procedures that we need to. This is a simple method of planning that anyone can do. And it goes back to those first principles that I talked about. We dissect a problem down to its base layer. Now, you may have a good idea of certain things that are in your purview, right? So you may know about weather events that have occurred in your particular area. You may know about maybe some crime or various types of crime that may be common. You may know about, let's say a chemical plant that's manufacturing something that may be using certain chemicals within your general area. All these things are great, and you should know about these, but knowing the effects as well and how to safeguard yourself from those effects, that's where we need to deep dive into it a little bit more. And so the beauty about America right now is that every single county in the United States should have something in there that is going to save you so much time and research scouring the internet. And that is called the hazard mitigation plan. Depending on whether you're in a large city, they may have their own hazard mitigation plan because they have so many resources and residents and people within the city. Or if you're in a suburb or rural setting, you might have a large county that then will have a hazard mitigation plan. And inside that hazard mitigation plan, you can go and hit Control F, do a quick search. You can put in something like hazards, threats, risk mitigation. Those things are take you directly to the subsections that you're going to want for identifying some of the hazards in your area. To give you an example, like in the county that I work, there are two nuclear power stations that overlap within the county. That is a new type of problem, a new type of dynamic we now have to work through as a emergency management of the county, right? And they're older. They're back from when the nuclear power plants were the big thing. But knowing how things change, we have to constantly be updating to the standards and the things set. When we're talking about these plants in particular, we can go into my county and we can look at that hazard, specifically, nuclear radiation leak or power plant compromise, something like that. And there's going to be some basic information about what's going to, the risk involved with that, the probability, all those different things. Same thing with the flooding, same thing with other things that may be an issue that we're looking at and forward projecting, like cyber terrorism or cyber attack, infrastructure attack, pipeline attacks. You may not even know, but you may have a pipeline somewhere in your neighborhood or going through your community, and you have no clue what they're pumping through that pipeline. So these are all things within that hazard mitigation plan will get you this baseline knowledge and point you in the direction that you need to look. And this is a public facing document that is developed by emergency managers of that area so that the public is better educated about what's in that area. Now, if you have to take all these government documents with a grain of salt, because they aren't going to be as upfront and direct about those hazards and problems. It's going to be wrapped up very nicely for the reader, because you do not want to instill in your populace any sort of idea that we don't have it under control. That's just how it is. But once you have that document, and you should be able to download this off your city or county site, you can then start looking at the events that they list as previous examples of those hazards, because in order for that to be a identified hazard within your area, it needs to have a history. And then you could start looking within that history, looking at those locations of that damage and where that damage was, the focal points. You can start kind of seeing if you're within the danger zone, if you're within an area that has flooding, or maybe you're in an area that a tornado touched down 15 years ago and did some damage. Maybe you're in an area that has a pipeline that runs nearby. Regardless, you're going to get a really good overview of what hazards may be direct effect to you. All right? And once we have that information, it's very, very easy to start figuring out what we need to survive those encounters. Because if you think about it, if you have history in that plan, or they're referencing certain events that you can go and look up, there's going to be a timeline, a date to date of that event, with temperatures, with how many people were killed, what the main obstructions were, what it was impeding, and has that area solved that problem since then. We got hit with a storm here in Pennsylvania with Ida that is classified now as a 1,000-year storm. And it really made people rethink some of the flood and flood mitigation practices that were either not being implemented or should have been implemented, and some of the damage and lives that were affected by that. So these plans have so much information that saves you having to do Google searches and wading through the muck, as I like to call it. And it's so much easier now because I can tell you exactly what I have. And I will. I'll tell you my basic plan in terms of how I think, and that's the whole purpose of this course, is giving you the ability to take some of these tricks and mindset practices that I've been using living in apartments, living in studios, living in, on the ground, in the back of my truck, and now in a nice house. It's all these things are going to be presented to you in a way that, regardless of your situation, it isn't dictated by, well, this stuff is what you should get. It's dictated by, let me make an assessment based off of what I know about this area and how the hazards and threats are going to affect me out there. So let's move on a little bit further down the line here. Thing to remember with FEMA and government agencies, and even your state, county, and local agencies, they are following guidelines in how they assist you. They are prioritizing based off of that plan and other plans within your area, county, city, local municipality, township, whatever it is. Their plans and how they're going to react to these dangers are either laid out in the hazard mitigation plan or other forward-facing public documents, right? That's going to tell you what they're able to handle, the resources that are available within that area. You will be able to see very, very quickly, looking through the history of these events, it was very difficult for them to respond to stuff by day 3 because of the level of flooding occurring all over the county, preventing EMS and fire and law enforcement from bypassing certain areas to get to people who are affected, right? You also have to remember that the wheels of government is slow to turn. Perfect example is it took FEMA 3 days to get water to the Superdome during Hurricane Katrina. That's why we can't put our reliance in other organizations. We have to first start with ourselves, then our family, and then our greater community to build these spheres of resiliency and knowledge to protect ourselves during the times that are here, to be honest. So, now that we've covered the hazard mitigation plan, your homework is to Google whatever your county or your city hazard mitigation plan, or even your township's EAP, Emergency Action Plan, and you'll see in there what their responses will be in a nutshell for some of these major events, and it's going to give you all the hazards that they perceive that are the largest or the highest ranked threats of your area is the best way to put it. Okay. Make sure you're taking notes and saving this information. Once again, the link that I have you is going to be a living document, and so I'm also putting the notes in the captions below these videos, but in that living document I'm simply going to expand that document with all these different videos and lessons for you guys to be able to tap into it, copy it, paste it, put it on your own living document, and build off of it. And that's the goal of that. So get the information from that hazard mitigation plan, start looking at that, and you can slowly start to put a picture. The other piece of homework that you should really be considering and thinking about is, what does life look like to you in any of these events? How are you going to manage your resources if you are put into any one of these hazardous events? How are you going to manage these resources if you do not have an end time frame for whatever that event may be? So we're talking short term, our 1 to 3 day time frame where we're getting hit maybe by the intensity of a tropical storm or a winter storm or something of that nature. Your medium time frames, right, extending out to possibly 5 days a week to up to a month, and then your long-term time frames, which is kind of that month time period even further out. Because based on the event, that is a perfect goal for you to set. If you think that the longest event you may have to deal with in terms of these general hazards, let's say, is going to be a winter storm. We'll use Texas during the frost as a good example. There was probably about anywhere from 2 weeks on a couple, certain areas of Texas were without power and we're having difficulties with heat. And so knowing that, or if you live up in Maine and sometimes you've been snowed in, knowing that, what's that time frame look like to you? To me, the bare minimum that I would say that you want to think about planning is 1 month. And the reason being is, if things aren't resolved in that 2-week FEMA time period, right? Because FEMA recommends your 3-day disaster supply kit, in addition to that, 2 weeks of food and water on hand. But with a month, you can start thinking about sourcing stuff. You can start making phone calls. You can start asking friends and family. You can start going out and once you've gone past maybe that initial period, if we are dealing with infrastructure issues, if you have a month worth of power, for example, now it's time to go and say, hey, how can I negotiate for more gas or propane? Or where can I get some other power from? Or whatever the case may be. Okay, so I hope this is helpful. Please go and look at those hazard mitigation plans. They're such a good hack for just getting you a clearer idea of what the hazards are in your area, but more importantly, what the government entities within your areas view as the greatest threats and hazards of that area. And then once we kind of figure out the overall foundationary plan for that, we will take that and we will then, start dissecting that up and building our overall plan around that, and then slowly start to think about maybe some of these black swan events that we've all discussed a little bit. The civil unrest, the infrastructure issues, all these things we're going to jump into that too, but right now we need to focus on this. So I hope this helps. Feel free to comment. Feel free to send me a message if you have any questions. If you have any suggestions, feel free to send those as well. So catch y'all later.